Which I'm okay with, right? That- Just about ready? No, she's not here.
Right, Shiloh's not here.
All right. Can you see around this one? I had to move it.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Calling to order the Tuesday, October 25th, 2022 meeting of the Planning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Kristen, can you do roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Bartis?
Here.
Chair Kempner?
Here?
Commissioner Patterson?
Here.
Commissioner Woods?
Here.
Commissioner Pasalakwa?
Here.
Commissioner Dolan said she would be absent this evening. Commissioner Hamame?
Here.
You have a quorum?
Would anyone like to make a motion to excuse Commissioner Dolan?
Motion to excuse Commissioner Dolan.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Approval of agenda. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda? Or motions to approve?
I have one addition. So I had a meeting with a gentleman on 11 Mile the other day who was interested to know if the Planning Commission would ever entertain the idea of having live work added as a permitted use in the 11 Mile district. If that's something the commission feels comfortable just talking about generally this evening, that would be great. If not, I can add it on a future agenda.
I think we can probably have a conversation, right? Under new business.
That would be appreciated.
Number 2, work on 11 Mile. Discussion. Any other changes? Or motions?
Move to approve the agenda as amended.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Approval of the minutes. We'll start with the minutes of September 27th, 2022. Does anyone have any changes? Or a motion?
Move to approve.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting minutes of September 27th, 22 approved, and now October 11th, 2022. Any changes? Or motions?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And those minutes are approved as well. Any communications?
No.
Okay. Citizens' comments. I see nobody in our audience.
Well, there's somebody.
Everybody doesn't count. All right, moving on to old business. We'll start with the public hearing. An ordinance to amend section 94-5, exempt signs, signs permitted in non-residential districts. In chapter 94, signs of the City of Berkley Code of Ordinances, and section 138-32, 138 through 143, 138-222, 138-526, 138-527, and 138-679 of Chapter 138, zoning to implement the downtown design guidelines for the downtown area. That was a mouthful. Kristen, Megan, who's leading us?
Yeah.
So before you tonight are revised amendments, revised per your input last time. Also, the city attorney looked them over and added some changes. Mostly they were minor changes, shalls to mays and et cetera. One thing we noted in our cover letter was that Councilman Hennon had a question. He noted that the sidewalks in that 12-mile zoning district, so that's the far western side of 12 Mile, are narrow, and was there a way to offer an incentive? And you can see that what we offered was merely a requirement that a 10-foot sidewalk be provided. That's more, usually what you do is,
Sorry, there's
accidental phone call. So usually what you do is you'll require that, and you'll require it by street. If you're doing something where you're basing the regulation on street, because this is at one particular juncture, you could do that. If you're offering an incentive, you need to offer something else with it going up or less parking. We hadn't had any discussions on that, so I really didn't feel comfortable at this point in time having those going by you, but you could add that final sentence that's in our cover letter saying that for new construction, a 10-foot minimum setback is required, not requires, to allow for a sidewalk with a minimum width of 10 feet. So it's a little bit of putting something in at the last minute. It would be a placeholder. Really what you should do is when you rewrite the zoning ordinance, look at each street on these corridors, each different blocks, and then code to what you want. And we've been as specific in zoning ordinances as to, on this part, for these 5 blocks, on this type of street, the sidewalk area is 15 feet wide. 5 of it is for outdoor seating and furnishings. 5 of it is for foot traffic, and then 5 of it is for street trees and planters. So it's really up to you what you're comfortable with bringing forward. Otherwise, I feel like everything we've that's in your packet and was published for the public hearing is territory we've gone over before, and would be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
I have a couple. Note N in the schedule of regulations. I'm not quite following. Is it prohibited to have setbacks? Because that's how I read it.
Yeah,
It's prohibited to have setbacks.
so no setbacks.
Why would we ever prohibit it?
It's the way that this ordinance is structured. What we could do is put 0 and then an N.
I guess I just want to understand if you can help me, why? Like, why would we prohibit setbacks? Like, I'm not following that. It seems to me that setbacks from a road are always good. And if somebody has the room to do what they want to do and what's required of them and provide a setback.
So not necessarily if you want to have the buildings built to the sidewalk's edge and in a straight line like your downtown and most downtowns. So most of those, your downtown is like many downtowns where they built right up to the sidewalk or the right-of-way at that time. And the back of the sidewalk, that incorporates, that's in the right-of-way. So 9 times out of 10 when you're walking down 12 Mile, that you're in a public right-of-way, and that's not like a green field where the property line, where the right-of-way is over the property line. It's that the street actually, where it meets the building, where the right-of-way line meets the property line, that's the edge of the property line as it's described. So in this case, it would be they're looking for a 0 setback in order to continue that street wall, and also to prevent parking in the front yard. Because even if you put 10 feet in the front yard, unless you require it for something, you can get a car in there. And I think you see instances when you go, especially down 12 Mile, you can see, and even some instances on Coolidge, where there is that pull-in parking in front, and especially chains want that front yard parking. They don't feel like they can be successful without that. So those are the reasons to have a 0-foot setback in a walkable urban area.
I think it should be, I mean, I struggle with this too, but it's the build to line is what takes its place, right? Which I don't know if, were you here, Commissioner Hamame, for that discussion?
I don't know if she was, but I was going to add a little bit too, just from the design guidelines perspective. So if we think of 12 Mile or Coolidge, but if we're thinking of 12 Mile as a room, okay? So think of the building walls as the walls of your room. So we're saying this is where we want the walls to be in order to create the type of streetscape that we want to create with the pedestrian realm, obviously a place for autos, and then you have the pedestrian realm and the other wall. So that's what I think the design guidelines envision, and this is the vehicle that we're using to make sure those walls are put in the places that we want them to be.
Okay. And is this where the city attorney added comments to this section? Where he changed the shall to may?
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of the shells have been changed to must. It's my understanding that the state of Michigan, when they're updating their regulations, is going from shall to must too, just to have plainer language.
This one is may,
In footnote N.
yeah,
And will.
and will.
All right, let me see which one you're talking about. Correct. So that's what we wanted it to read. You could not have a setback unless it talks about the defined plaza or eating area or pedestrian space, and then also the first floor residential use, we allowed for a setback there too. So that's to create a consistent building wall.
And it's only in the 12 Mile district and the downtown district.
But is this written in the manner to where they are only under consideration for the setback if they are going for residential?
Or if the planning commission finds that the area would be developed as a defined plaza or outside eating area, something else that enhances the streetscape.
Because the blue is would follow that as an addition, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, all right, yeah.
And that was because of the Phillips Row homes that were recently approved.
I don't know, it seems to me to say, it seems like it's a little, no setback may be permitted. I mean, no setback is permitted, or setbacks are prohibited, or something, but if the city attorney looked at this and he's fine with it.
He was fine, but if you guys wanted to change the wording a little bit, it's the intent would be the same.
I'm not a city attorney. I'll roll with it.
On that, though, it does read a bit awkwardly. So if no setback is permitted
Yeah, that's fine.
is clearer and plainer to everyone who might read it, then I say let's do that.
And I think my only question on that is is may used as for any chance of flexibility there. Is that why? Okay.
Yeah, may is permissive. Shall is mandatory. So I like the is better.
So the intent of this is just to allow it to be done for the right development. Because as of right now, it doesn't matter if you've got the best thing under the sun. If you're setting back, you're done. Or
Unless
trying to
you
set-
all decide that it
Well, but I'm
meets.
saying the way it's written now. Oh, I see, right, we could
Yeah.
override it, but, yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, like I said, my only thought with that is, but it's really up to the developer, is all the parking's in the back. So if they're trying to meet a certain amount of square footage and they're backing up off of the right of way, but they're backing into where their parking is going to be, what kind of challenge does that create for them? But that's a challenge that they gotta figure out, if that's what they want.
I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges, as somebody who walks Coolidge all the time, is the amount of curb cuts we have already. Like anything we can do to get rid of those, especially when you're walking with a child, or even now a dog, is key because there's a lot of those areas where you have to pull across the sidewalk before you can even see where you can turn. So if we keep all the parking in back, we make all of that safer.
The exception for the planning commission, can you envision another type of use? Seems to me if anyone is going to want a setback, it's gonna be for a defined plaza, outside eating, or pedestrian space. What other than pushing the building back is what you're trying to limit only?
Right.
And the parking.
Yeah, and the reason for, on page 4, proposed sentence, when a first floor residential use is allowed, was exactly because on those, for residential use, you want them to have a little bit of private space, a little bit of semi-public or private space in order to give them privacy. And then ideally also the first floor is up a little. So that was added because quite frankly with the 12 mile, the planning commission gave an exception, but it was a little bit of, we were stretching that exception that was there.
Okay, thanks. If we're all done with that one, actually, that was my next question, is why need second sentence, but, can I ask another one real quick? Standard section 138 to 679 on page 4, paragraph D doesn't read like the rest of them. So if you look at A, general standards, and then paragraph B reads, development must be compatible, and then paragraph C reads, development must incorporate, and then D just says, enhance the character. I'm thinking it should also read, developer must. That was all I had.
Anybody else?
I have a couple. So in the design guide section 138.6.9 that we're working in, I guess I'm still wondering the word appropriate is used. Yeah, I mean, is that still just standard language for following some good design guidelines?
Which
So
which number are you on, Joe?
let me find one where it was used.
C4
Let
is
me
one.
do a control F.
C4 has
Oh, yeah.
at least one.
Yeah, like for example, design roofs that are appropriate to the architectural style of the building and contextual surrounding area. I mean, just still the engineer in me always wonders, how are we going to determine what's appropriate?
You want consistent?
It could be that. You could say that match the style of the building. I think that one would be a little bit easier to determine.
Compatible?
Yeah, any of those really would work.
Okay. And I mean, it's just my own question on the use of that word, and if there's no other issues with not changing it, then I'm fine with it, but.
I think in our last master plan, it was contextual. That was like sprinkled along a lot in that same sort of way. I think most of these things end up having one of those words that kind of like gives you some wiggle room-ish.
Okay.
Do you want compatible?
I like compatible, but I also don't like the zoning ordinance when we amend certain sections, we change terminology that has been used consistently throughout. So if we say appropriate throughout, until we do a full rewrite, I think using different terminology is gonna cause more problems than.
May I play devil's advocate on that one statement? So this section, when we do a full rewrite, I don't know that this section will be rewritten. I can't say what the rest of the ordinance uses. If it uses appropriate, it might not. But we're going to be scrapping a lot of that. So I'm just going to throw out that we probably won't redo this one. If you guys wanted to come up with a way that you want to look at things now, I don't know that it would be too long that they would not match.
And to continue on that point, our current ordinance probably uses like 5 different terms.
Yeah, I like I like consistent, if that was
Or
the
compatible?
compatible.
Compatible, okay.
Okay, and then
Megan, do you have a better term you want us to use? Or are you good with that?
No, the only reason that you would use appropriate or something that wasn't necessarily, so compatible implies that what is existing is what you want. And so maybe it would be compatible with the existing areas or in compliance with the design guidelines.
Well, in
Yeah.
this particular paragraph, I don't know if he pointed to where we're at.
No, which, can you give me the size?
C4,
C4,
page 5.
yeah.
design roofs that are appropriate to
Yeah.
the architectural style of the building.
I think compatible is fine. Compatible with the architectural set, yeah.
So, appropriate, if I remember correctly, it's in there a few different times in a few different ways, right? Not just in that one.
I don't see it in any other spaces in page 4 or 5 or 6, I don't think.
Okay, I have so 138.222, which is page 2 about parking lot. Just out of curiosity, there's a term called protective lighting, and I didn't know if that has any specific meaning or definition, and I did not look that up, as opposed to just lighting. It's E. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess if I was a developer, I was just curious, like,
Protective lighting.
what protective lighting is versus parking lot lighting, or what are we talking about?
Right,
That's all.
and the protective lighting is usually to protect pedestrians. So you're giving, that's what, but I think you could say pedestrian lighting instead of protective, and that's much more specific.
Okay.
That's a good question. I thought it referred to the actual light itself.
I did too. I thought maybe shielding.
That's what
Yeah.
I was thinking, shielding.
Let's change that to pedestrian.
Okay. Then on the last sentence of that same paragraph, it's on the next page. I was curious. I'm trying to think of situations because it's very firm with the must. About plans must allow pedestrians to walk parallel to moving vehicles and minimize crossing parking aisles. I guess I was just wondering if there's reasons why it's must, if that's just a general safety kind of thing for parking lots.
Yeah, so when you're walking parallel to moving vehicles, you're walking beside it rather than in front of them, there's less chances of crashes. And so if you can set, then, so if there is a pedestrian connection, then it needs to run parallel to those moving vehicles.
Okay, so what I'm thinking is like a narrow parking lot where cars face each other and there's a sidewalk in between the front of the cars, and then they're parallel, because that would be like, if it's and say it's angled parking, so they're one way, so
Right.
you wouldn't, like, that's the idea.
That's the idea, but
Okay.
you raise a good point in that you're a built-out city,
Mm-hmm.
and some of your parking lots were not really designed for spaces to be parking lots. So
Right.
maybe what's appropriate here is that the planning commission, with like a comma there, and said, but the planning commission can waive that, can waive that requirement, when it's deemed not feasible.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I don't wanna, I wanna
is-
give people design parameters
Yes.
that they start with, and then come and ask you for exceptions. So I think that's a place where you can add in an exception, that's done at the planning commission level.
So like a
Yeah.
semicolon and
Mm-hmm.
okay, moving vehicles and minimize crossing parking aisles, semicolon, the planning commission may waive unless determined not feasible by the planning commission or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather not use the term waive.
So semicolon, unless this is determined to be not feasible by the planning commission.
Any other questions?
Two. So I just, on the one on the sign, the very first one, I was just having trouble understanding the exemption.
And just a note, the sign is being included for the planning commission's review as a courtesy. This is usually something that would go right to the city council since it's part of the city code.
Okay.
So what an exempt is that they don't have to ask for a permit.
Okay.
So these are things that the city is fine with occurring without us knowing, like, there's not gonna be any harm, to health, safety, or welfare, or aesthetics with these signs occurring, cause then we're basically saying the city doesn't have any, control or say-so over it.
Okay. Yeah, but like you mentioned, this is not something we would even really
Feel free to comment. I
comment
just
on,
wanted,
right? But yeah,
usually it's
okay.
not something, but since this is all kind of part of one package that would go to the council, we included it, but right.
Okay. What is
usually it's not.
vehicle signs then?
Well, I'd have to go back to the definitions if
Oh,
we
sorry,
even-
I did not look up some of the
No,
definitions. I
that's
was just reading these as
I was
is.
thinking them as like those
The pizza
trucks
sign?
that come up now.
It's any sign attached to an operable vehicle licensed to operate on public streets. Any sign attached to a vehicle where the vehicle cannot be legally operated without removing the sign shall be deemed a portable sign. Any sign that is regularly parked for more than 72 hours in a location conspicuously visible from a public street shall be deemed a portable sign. And you don't allow, I think you don't allow portable signs.
Okay. All right, no, that was good. I was just curious because I was like, oh, signs, like we don't usually comment on that. The last one, I noticed planning commission is like lowercase. Is it always supposed to be that way?
It's that way throughout.
Oh, it
the
is? Okay,
entire-
then that's fine. I was just curious. I was like, every once in a while saw it and I was like,
Older ordinances like this, a lot of times you'll see planning commission, city council, it's all lowercase.
okay. That's all I have.
Anybody else? All right, well, with that, I'm going to open our public hearing at 7:29. Do we have any communication on this topic?
Nothing.
Okay. And no one in the audience. I don't see anyone breaking down the door. So with that, I will close the public hearing at 7:29.
Oh, I have one more question. So, and I guess I was thinking Commissioner Dallin was going to be here. So number 19 on page 7. So do we include the stormwater engineering, the design variable storms here? Or is that something that should just be referred to as Oakland County standards in case it changes?
So are you referring to where we changed from the 10 to 100 year storm?
Yeah, yes.
That was probably just a typo, I assumed.
That was not a typo. We used to only require a 10-year storm.
That's like every storm we have.
Mm-hmm. So Commissioner Dallin had asked that that be brought up to the current county standards. That was her main concern. So I don't know that she would oppose, and I don't want to speak for her, but the idea was that it match the Oakland County standards because that's what we enforce. So if the
Okay.
commission would rather refer to that,
Okay.
they operate under a 100-year storm.
I think 100-year storm is everybody's.
For now, but what if they don't do it in 5 years? I mean, what
Yeah,
if they say
so-
150?
Seeing as how often it was, people want to go through zoning rewrites, I almost think it might make more sense to use county standards. That way, if the county standards change, it automatically applies to our ordinance as opposed to us remembering to check that and then adjusting.
We never think the county would be less than ours. Historically, it's never been like that, correct?
Historically, it hasn't, but there are
I mean,
communities.
should we put that or county standards, whatever? Don't do that.
Historically, we have not been more, but in the recent past, there are communities who have required more. The county, I think, changed, wasn't it? It's in the last 10 years, I think, that they switched, right?
It's in the last year.
The last year.
that-
Okay.
That
very
they
recent.
did a full update. I wouldn't suspect that they would change theirs
Soon.
soon.
But who knows what the future brings? I don't see the city. I see the city operating always within the county standards, for now.
Never being more strict or.
There's
For that.
nothing that would indicate to me that the DPW or engineering consultant that tends to be more strict.
All right.
And if you intended to be more strict, you would have to amend you would have to either create a stormwater ordinance. I'm not sure if you have one, or, so you would create that stormwater ordinance and then you would amend that section of the zoning ordinance as well to make sure that they reflect your city standards. So if you said the drainage area on site will detain per Oakland County, is it a drain commission or what? Oakland County Water Resources Commission standards, that would be adequate. And I feel like this phrase would be changed if the city decided to enact its own stricter standards.
So another thing I was thinking about here. So this, and this is in light of your comment about the rewrite. This was already a bullet in here, and only the 10 to 100 year storm is changing.
Mm-hmm.
So would this section be open up to rewrite as far as what plan recite what they need requirements on, and we can?
So, yes, it could,
Okay.
with a huge asterisk that we will do this. This will be part of the rewrite.
Okay. Yeah, again, I was just curious because it's so specific compared to some of the other, like, actual site plan requirements. But if it was already there, then I guess, then if we're only changing the 10 to 100, then that's also okay.
Or if we change to the county standards, it'll be the same anyways, correct? But then if the county changes in 5 years,
Or 10 years, who knows how long it's going to take us to try and rewrite things.
Yeah.
right, because this ordinance is pretty,
I mean, like, the next one, you know what I'm saying? Like, if they were to change, how fast are we doing full zoning rewrites? I don't know. So I guess, how does everybody feel about changing it to county standards?
it's
Fine.
usually what they come back with anyways, correct, on our site plans there.
Right, so
DPW are always saying follow county standards and,
Yeah, over the past year, they were reviewed per county standards, even though this said
correct.
10 years.
Mm-hmm. That's like the law.
Okay, so we'll change that phrase to the drainage area on the site will detain per the requirements of the Oakland County Water Resources Commission.
Sounds good.
I personally like that because, like, even if I look at like 15, it says, you know, location and type of outside lighting, including site and fixture photometrics. The amount of photometric like lumination is not mentioned here, you know, as far as the exact value that has to be obtained. So I guess I was just sort of leaning towards these shouldn't be, have numbers associated with them
Well,
mostly, you know, because those are in other places.
Generally, unless it cross-references something else.
Yeah.
So I think the cross-reference with the county standards would then take care of that.
Well, I mean, that's the second part of a sentence, so should that apply to the entire paragraph?
So you're saying stormwater engineering per the requirements of the Oakland County Drain Commission, including dot, 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 dot.
I mean, if we're gonna refer to them in one part of this paragraph, I'm just suggesting,
Yep. Nope. So then it would go stormwater engineering per the requirements of the Oakland County Water Resources Commission, comma, including da, 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 and then, the drainage area on site,
I think if you put it at the very beginning, you don't have to put it in that second part. It would
Yeah.
already be encompassed. Probably in accordance with instead of per.
I guess somewhat devil's advocate on that one. Megan, have you come across to where communities have referenced, you know, a county commission as it relates to utilities and following those regulations as kind of it's a blanket statement, right? Whatever the county says you gotta do for this stuff is what you gotta do. But then it actually, because of the way it was set up, was so prohibitive for the type of development that it kinda killed it. I think I'm reaching for like 1 in a million instances here, but
No, some communities do that. I'm thinking City of Dexter does that because Washington County Water Resources Commission, they revised their standards about 10 years ago, and at that point in time, we're one of the most aggressive. Now, I would say that that's what everybody's brought their standards to. But again, small built-out city, not every site could have the amount of detention. Also, they had a lot of, they required a lot of rain gardens that they didn't have space for. So they have their own standards, but they paid their engineers to write their own standards.
yeah, right.
Well, that is a good point, though, because we started this conversation with, why do we say 100-year storm? Why don't we just defer to the county? And now we're saying we're gonna defer to the county, but then we're gonna also include our 100 years. So it kind of, if the county changes, then whose controls?
Yeah. I mean, what I've seen, and Kristen can weigh in, is that your engineers and your DPW have a pretty regimented way that they look at things, but also they're looking at things on a site-by-site basis. So what it may be worthwhile to do is, I don't know whether you've talked to DPW and the engineers about this specific site, about this specific phrase and the amendments. So it might be best to get their input, and then what you could say in your motion is defer to changing that particular line to whatever DPW and the city engineers recommend.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's fine. We can do that.
Any other thoughts, questions? Yes.
Are you looking for a motion?
If nobody has anything else, then yeah.
I will make a motion to, is this a first reading?
This would be a recommendation
Recommendation.
to city council.
Make a recommendation to city council to approve the ordinance amendment for section 94-5 exempt signs, signs permitted in non-residential districts, and chapter 94 signs of the City of Berkeley Code of Ordinance, and sections 138 to 143, 138 to 222, 138 526, 138 527, 138 679, 138 680 of chapter 138 zoning to implement the downtown design guidelines adopted by the city as amended during discussion today.
Support.
Does that motion work for you?
I have one question. We had gone over in the beginning, Councilman Hennon's suggestion, and then that sentence that I had said that could address that. But I really didn't hear a discussion from the planning commission as to whether you wanted to include that or not.
I thought we were gonna look at that when we do the rewrite, when we look
Okay.
at the street.
Or were
That's-
we just using it as a placeholder now until the rewrite?
It can be either. So you could put it in as a placeholder now until the rewrite, or it's something we could look at as Megan was describing on a block by block basis as part of the rewrite. I am compiling a whole list of these random items that will come up and be highlighted when we do that. So I could add it to that list if that's the wish of the commission.
Yes.
Yes.
So do not include the placeholder right now. We will tackle it as part of the rewrite.
Thank you.
Yeah, it seems this is something that should be addressed on a more global basis.
All right,
So there was motion and
there's a
second.
motion, there was a second. You got clear, you're happy with the motion, like it's, you have all the information that you need for it? All right, would you like to roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Bartis?
Yes.
Chair Kempner?
Yes.
Commissioner Patterson?
Yes.
Commissioner Woods?
Yes.
Commissioner Pasalakwa?
Yes.
Commissioner Hamame?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Lovely. All right, our next item is outdoor seating. Megan, are you leading that one for us again?
Yeah, so, gosh, when I started going through this, you have a lot of choices. I'm gonna walk through the memo in order except for one thing. What I'd like to start off with is on rooftop seating. When I looked at those regulations, usually it's a special land use because it's above grade, and it's got a lot more opportunity for nuisance than something that, just like that, that would, than something, that's in the front yard, the side yard, or whatnot. So I feel like that's a big decision, but maybe an easy decision as to whether to have those as a special land use, whether to allow, you could allow rooftop seating as a special land use, you could not allow it at all, or you could allow it as an accessory use with that with the administrative approval.
And I would just note we do have one current rooftop seating location.
Can I ask a quick question? Can you refresh my recollection? I feel like we just changed outdoor seating to be permitted uses. And the discussion was concern about if it's just permitted, there's no regulation. And so that's why this is back before us.
Correct.
So currently rooftop would be special land use,
Yes.
but because we just recommended amending,
We discussed it, and then you said, we want more rules around
Yeah.
it, and so,
but
Yeah.
rooftop was always special land use, just like with all other outdoor.
yes,
So the question is whether we want to carve that back out
yes,
and leave it special land use and everything else permitted.
yes.
Thank you.
So you want us to have a discussion on that part first, and then just
Yeah.
take these like bits, chunks by
Yeah,
chunks?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about rooftops.
I think it should be separate. I think it's like two different.
What did you say? I didn't.
It should be
catch that.
separate. Like not part of this outdoor seating discussion.
Well, it is outdoor seating.
Yeah.
But the
Yes.
question is whether we want to make it a special land use versus leave it a permitted use, just like all other outdoor seating.
Well, we don't have to make that decision though, right?
That's
can
what she's
still-
asking for.
Yeah, that's what we're, or do we clump it in with regular where it's a permitted use, or are we keeping it as a special land use because it has these different attributes to it?
Oh, I guess I was interpreting it like we could talk about it both ways and then it could be added in later as permitted.
You could, so, yes, you can do whatever you want with it. So, like, right now, it's treating, like, right now your ordinance is treating rooftop outdoor eating areas and sidewalk cafe as rectangles. And we're saying all rectangles, what we're saying is all rectangles should be an accessory use with administrative approval. My question back to you is, are you going to, you may want to treat rooftop seating as a square and have, while they are similar, they're a little different, and that square should have a special land use approval.
So can we talk a minute about what the differences are? And what I mean by that is, I understand there's more risk, there's opportunity to throw things from the roof or people or whatever. What is a special land use gonna do for us that regulations imposed in an ordinance doesn't?
So it gives you a discretionary standard to say no. So when it's an administrative, or even when it's a site plan that's approved by the planning commission, it's an administrative function. And if it meets all the rules, you're you need to say yes. But there are some cases where discretion might be needed, where that same rooftop cafe is gonna have a different impact depending on where it's located. So if you have a rooftop, where's the current rooftop location?
24 seconds. 24 seconds is
Right in the downtown area on
near
12.
Berkley Common on that same block.
Okay.
With
So-
no setback.
Yeah, I know setback.
But there is a municipal parking lot behind that location, for example.
And if a house was right up against that, and let's say there wasn't backyard parking, or it was a restaurant, I'm trying to think of an instance where there's a restaurant that's right up against a residential area where you don't have, you might have half that parking lot behind it. I'm thinking if you're going down Coolidge.
And I might be able to think of something. So if something were to go in near Green Lantern, there's some shallow parcels there near Greenfield, for example, along 12 Mile, that have behind, like near D&D bicycles, right? There's one row of parking there. If a business were to come in, say it's a 2-story, now they're putting on a rooftop seating area. You have homes that are right there. This rooftop seating area is going to be looking down into people's backyards. That might be okay. But is that something the Planning Commission wants the ability to evaluate on a site-by-site basis? Or is the answer, well, you know what, I don't know that it's all that different than having a second floor on a building and you have nearby residences and they're just not going to have the same impacts? Or is having an at-grade seating area, are there instances where you might say they're going to have lights on the roof, or perhaps they're going to have music, and is it going to carry differently from a rooftop setting than it might carry from an at-grade setting where you could have a little bit of screening with some trees or something? Maybe it's not. I think that you're just throwing that question out there. Is there a difference?
So the main, I guess the big question is whether or not to allow this as an accessory use, and it will have a schedule of regulations that are a blanket schedule of regulations, if you will, no matter on what the circumstances, correct?
Right.
Whereas special land use would receive a bit more scrutiny. There could be a bit more
Conditions.
yeah, right.
You can attach
conditions
conditions.
set to it,
Mhm.
et cetera. So it's either between taking a case-by-case basis, depending on the location of a proposed rooftop, or allowing it as an accessory use, blanket regulations.
I think it's special use. We're not gonna see that many of them, and I think it's a different beast than at grade.
I think your example was a good example for
Yeah.
me too.
Yeah.
Same, I was thinking before, just, it's all the same, but now that you explained it that way.
So my devil's advocate is that we don't have a whole lot of floor space for outdoor seating. And if we want that kind of more lively, active, it might have to go up in order to happen. And one of the things that has stuck with me that Megan said early on is when we look at things, we make the things we want to happen easier instead of harder. So if what we want is at those kind of activated outdoor spaces, even if they have to go up, then looking at what regulations, we want around it might be a good idea, but it makes it one step harder to make it a special land use.
I mean, maybe you do a trigger. If you're within so many feet of residential, then you have to get permission from the planning commission, or, I mean, maybe it's a hybrid.
For
like that
rooftop
trigger
only or
option.
for every single outdoor seating area?
I would think rooftop.
I mean, right now we're discussing rooftops. There's so many little pieces.
And would you be saying that you would need planning commission approval or that you would need special land use approval?
Special land use approval.
Okay.
If you're so, I'm thinking out loud, but I get the concern, but I also get, the, business-friendly desires.
Yeah.
So maybe a hybrid but that would mean that we would eliminate all the other possible negative scenarios and focus just on the residential. You know what I mean? There could be other reasons why we would want to evaluate rooftop that we're not thinking about right now. And so if we did carve out residential, then that's all we would be calling it a special use for.
Well, and I would still like to see, like what regulations would surround, because I think it would be different than a little cafe, right?
Yeah, she's got them in here.
Yeah. And Plymouth has quite the list, and it's a special land use there. And I think one of the things that can really be the most distracting from street level or nearby businesses or residences is televisions, monitors, and screens, that they shouldn't be visible from street level, because those changing lights, they grab your eye. It's just human instinct to look at them. So that can be a nuisance and a distraction. But it's really on the rooftops, it's a matter of a lot of it is about noise, and that you're up higher, it can float, it goes further. And it's not blocked by anything unless it's the same height.
There's no roof stopping it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I just feel, I feel like your regulations can come with the most forethought you can throw at something, but having worked for them and with them, like, developers are crafty. I would just hate for us to be in a situation where, like, somehow they found a way to check all the boxes and we don't have any way to say no, but we've got a room full of people living there just losing their minds. Again, playing devil's advocate, I personally don't see I'd love to see this stuff come forward. I personally don't see a lot of this stuff. The cost it adds to development is high, on top of the cost to do anything right now is high. So I'm not saying that should be an excuse to just play it easy on this, but I don't know. For me, I want an out. But
I'm
this,
leaning towards special land use also.
yeah.
Did we, for those row houses coming, didn't we approve patios? Does that also, is that considered outdoor seating?
No, this would be for restaurant uses.
Okay, so this is commercial only. If we get more residential, it wouldn't be?
If people are talking about rooftop patios on residential, we don't review a patio.
Okay.
What you could do is in your zoning ordinance rewrite, put some standards in for rooftop patios. And so, and again, so some of those could be screening, some of those could, again, there's so many things you can do now to enhance your outdoor space, including television sets that can be built into walls and withstand the rain, or the elements. So, those are things to think about, but I don't think there are things to think about here at this moment with
Okay.
this set of regulations. Okay, so what I'm hearing, and maybe we go forward with when we bring things back, is that rooftop is a special land use. So and we can, maybe what I can do is also, we can look at residential setbacks and propose if, looking at the difference between where the rooftops are now and the situation that Kristen cited, and see if there is a dimension that we can look at in terms of setback. And it can be an either or choice.
Is everyone good with that?
All right.
Good.
All right, now while you're thinking of locations of these, one of the things is the first thing in my memo is location. And one of your concerns had been that, okay, so we're saying we no longer want to treat this as a special land use, but then, so then we don't have as much nuisance control over it. So let's build in rules that do that. One of the things can be the location. So essentially what we said was that, and what you had said was, we're not gonna put these on-street parking, that they're only gonna be in off-street parking that's on site, or it's gonna be a sidewalk cafe. That those were the two circumstances that you were comfortable with. So that's one side. So I just want to check in that was right.
That must have been before me.
Yeah, it may have been before me that I don't recall the on-street parking not being
I
allowed.
think this was a month ago, right? Was it September?
We
Yeah,
didn't
this-
talk on street parking.
This, I think it was briefly mentioned. So you have Birmingham had done this a lot, where they let people take an on-street parking space and turn it into an outdoor seating area. I don't think we spent a lot of time talking about it, but I also remember that there didn't seem to be a lot of interest. It was mentioned and maybe not even picked up.
And they're called parklets.
Milford has them too.
Why do we not want them?
So it would take up on-street parking spaces. So
No, we
that's,
do want them, right? We are permitting them.
Well, the city is permitting them currently, kind of, in one space, really, but that expires in December, right?
so that's in the city's right of way, right? We didn't. Yes, that expires in December. The on-street parking spaces on 12 Mile and Coolidge, I don't know if the resolution specifically permitted them. I don't know that it did, because Megan's right. Those parklets were kind of a separate thing. And I don't know that was necessarily the intention. If that's the direction that you all would be interested in going, we could look at that. I too was under the impression that was not something the planning commission was interested in.
And one thing to think about is you have really limited parking. Like,
In some areas.
In some areas.
We have a lot of municipal parking, but it's not all located in the most efficient location. So some businesses have limited parking on their properties and are quite a distance away from municipal lots. So would we want those businesses to be able to take their 2 or 3 on-street parking spaces that are in front of their business and turn it into an outdoor seating area? I guess that is the question for one of them for you all.
Well, and I mean, I think with the new configuration, which hasn't been fully approved yet of Coolidge, I think it allows, like the concept of that. I'm not sure that would even work on 12 Mile right now. There are
And that
times
12
getting-
miles also a county road. So I don't know what they would have to say about that either. I don't know if you have any experience with that. Probably less likely.
So it'd just be Coolidge.
Potentially, I don't want to speak for the road commission, but I would think they would want to be involved in some way.
I mean,
Well,
it'd be
would-
easier to get it implemented in Coolidge.
Right.
Isn't Maple a county road? Because I know Birmingham has places on Maple.
Yeah, it might be, and there might be instances where it's allowed.
Isn't it the evens?
Isn't what?
Isn't the county roads the evens? 12, 14, 16?
I
That's
don't
what
know.
I always thought. Maybe I,
That would make it easy.
maybe that was a
Yeah,
Google search and a dream.
I don't know.
My apologies.
I mean, so even if it wasn't a county road, I don't know that 12 Mile is set up for that to feel safe right now.
Well, and then the barriers become much different. Then the barriers really need to be something that if a car hits it, everybody's gonna be okay. Whereas if there are sidewalk cafes and they're on-site parking, or even it could be a municipal parking lot, it doesn't have to be something where, because traffic's not moving as fast. It doesn't have, the barriers look a lot different.
I think given the limited parking spaces that we have and the amount of opportunity that exists with the grid system as far as the entryways to some of these neighborhoods, like what was done with being very important, I would probably be more comfortable not allowing the on-street parking to be converted to a parklet. And I say that wearing my DDA hat a little bit too, in that a large support that the DDA had for the road diet on Coolidge was to open up for more parking, because it is so, you can't build more parking on Coolidge. That was the easiest, it was the cheapest way to get 50 more spaces on that corridor. So I guess I just wouldn't want to even open up the door to have those spaces start getting gobbled up. And ironically, the only places that they're gonna wanna get gobbled up are the places where we need the parking. I mean, La Salette isn't gonna be asking for a parklet, but we wouldn't care anyways, cause no one's gonna be parking in front of there. So, I would say my position for now would be to not allow the on-street parking to be included in this. But that's my 2 cents.
Well, I appreciate that, but what about the side streets
From the perspective of closing them down,
for outdoor seating?
yeah, I would be fine with that. I mean, is that considered, are you saying, is that considered on-street parking as well?
I think it would be.
I mean, that would have to be hashed out, cause I'm supportive of what was done at Griffith. The DDA is looking at certain changes to.
So I think this is a different discussion than what we're looking at to get from you all this evening. Closing down the side streets and letting people use, or even portions of the streets, and letting people, probably what would end up being is lease the right of way in order to accommodate seasonal outdoor seating.
I was still thinking the parklets, but on side streets, not on main roads.
So I'm gonna throw out, like, Robina is a really good example of a street that has clearly delineated on-street parking spaces. I think Griffith is a little bit less of an example because they don't have clearly delineated on-street parking on that side street, but there are a couple, and not to pick on Robina, but that's just the one that comes to mind. There are a couple other side streets that have clearly delineated on-street parking spaces. I do think, like Megan was saying, it's a different use, a different set of regulations. We'd have to contemplate whether or not we would want businesses to pay to lease that space from the city. The idea of bringing this outdoor seating ordinance forward is to make what we want easy, so to take it from generally being a special land use to being a permitted use. I think when we talk about getting into some of this parklet, I feel like parklets are a different discussion. A much bigger discussion than how do we want to regulate sidewalk cafes and your outdoor seating behind your business. I'm not saying it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I get it.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But if the idea is to help businesses, I mean, they'd do better with some outdoor seating.
So if the commission would be interested in going down that path, I would prefer to separate the two discussions. You could have a parklet discussion separately, and then we could continue on with the outdoor seating portion, because I think that would be easier to get taken care of.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So, no parklets for parklets
For
is
the moment.
a separate discussion.
It'll
So-
appear on an agenda in the future.
Yes.
Yes.
Rooftop.
So, two really propositions for location. Either that it's in the front and side yards only, or that it's 50 feet from residential, or you have no regulations. The only thing about 50 feet, and City of Ypsilanti does that, is, and so we could winch that down. There may be, when you look on, Coolidge has fairly deep lots. They are 130 feet deep. But 12 Mile, it's usually just 100 feet deep. So, and that's the whole lot. So you gotta have the building in there and then some other places. So, if you think you're taking half of it out, the building, and once you give us direction, what we can do is do some measurements and see where they fall out.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to know that if we did 50 feet today, who would be in violation?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think of like is it Amici's?
I was thinking Amici's too, but I was thinking Amici's because they're not in the front or side yard.
I also have a question. Does it,
50 feet from residential with where they are.
Right.
Sorry.
no, that's okay. Does it start to make it too complicated? Because what I'm thinking is there's a vast difference between somebody who has 3 or 4 cafe tables outside and somebody who has 20 tables that they're serving, right? It has a vast difference. Is there something we can have as a trigger, like after 20 people that you're serving outside, then you hit these regulations? But, you know, if we're talking about 4 cafe tables,
Well, I think we would still want the ability to review 4 cafe tables. I mean, say you have, for example, the Liquor Control Commission requires when you're serving alcohol that area be enclosed. If that area is enclosed, we want to make sure that there's panic hardware installed on the gate so that people can get out safely in emergency, and we want a trigger to be able to review that.
right?
So that's different than, say, the bistro tables that are throughout downtown now. So point taken, and I think we're trying to make that bistro table part easy. You know, hand me your piece of paper with your couple circles drawn and your couple tables shown, and that's easy.
Right.
When you start adding more things, then we need more information and more
And
to
I guess
review.
I'm thinking as far as like having a distance sort of regulation, right? So if you sit 20 patrons, now it has to be X far away. Does that make sense? Or is that complicating it too much?
Well, what are you trying to regulate? What are you trying to accomplish with the distance?
Because I think,
If Hartfield Lanes were to put up an outdoor seating area, I'm just throwing it out there because
Right.
it's our one giant parcel,
right,
right? I mean, that's really far away from a residential area. So they could put up a lot of tables and have few impacts.
right.
But if you were to put something behind like the D&D bicycles, they could put up 5 tables and have impacts to the adjacent residential.
I think I see where Lisa's coming from, where we don't want an outdoor restaurant where they're serving 100 people. The little bistro tables.
It's like your neighbor having people in the
picnic.
backyard.
You know, I mean, there's a difference between a picnic and a banquet hall. And maybe those are 2 very extreme cases, but I like the idea of, you know, a couple bistro tables. I think that has low impact in the front. If they're on Coolidge or 11 Mile, they're not disrupting residential. But if you put 25, 50 tables in the back, you've just added maybe tripled some of your seating inside the building and pushed it outside.
So Amici's is a really good example of that. They've had a very successful, I think, outdoor eating space that is behind their building and is probably more like 20 tables. I don't want to.
It keeps growing every time I.
Yeah, I don't want to say specifically. We haven't gotten any complaints about it at all.
But they have a decent parking lot behind, or no, that's right next to it, right?
I mean, they have a kind
40,
of that inset space, right, where they kind of had a ready-made courtyard that worked for that.
Right, but if somebody 24 seconds put 20 tables out back,
Yeah.
they don't have a parking lot there. But much, you know, that spot I
Right.
think is only 1 row there.
That gets into the the distance and the location question.
Yeah, so I guess how does that impact, I mean, I know it references, you know, proximity to residential, but how does that impact going up to the ingress egress of the alleyway? Like, you can't just, I don't see anything in here, maybe I'm just not reading it right, but crossing over, I guess, into that, where that lane of vehicle movement would typically be, getting in and out of the lot there.
So into an alley, you're asking could people use the alley for outdoor seating?
Right, I mean, instead of buffered to, or in addition to maybe buffer to the residential, or have an established buffer to the residential, establish a buffer to alley.
So I'm going to throw something really complicating into this. We have a surprising amount of areas where alleys have been vacated and are now part of private properties, a shockingly large amount. So while we have alleys that are operating as public alleys, in several instances, they are not public alleys. They are private property. So
The business could close them down if they wanted?
on a case-by-case basis, we would evaluate each option and see if there are existing easements and et cetera, et cetera. But technically, there are many instances where those alleys are public or private property.
Don't block my access to Harvard from Westbourne.
So I'm hearing a couple things. First is that the concern is that there is a concern of impact on residential, but some of it might be how large it is, and also how large it is in proportion to either you could regulate it by square feet. Regulating by square feet is probably better, because tables are very liquid. Like, and you don't want your code enforcement officer having to go out every other night and count. But so you could have a maximum, or you could have, if it gets above a certain point, you need to be 50 feet from residential, or whatever that standard is. Also, everybody's saying that Amici's is a large outdoor seating area and it works. So maybe that's a model that we code off of. And
Sorry, go ahead. Oh.
and so those were the things.
But with Amici's, they have kind of a courtyard. I don't know if any other
I mean,
current buildings have the same setup to model off that.
I don't know if they do.
Theirs is kind of enclosed, like that would.
Because they got one, they have like an L-shaped building.
It's kind of L-shaped. The other large outdoor seating area we have is Green Lantern. While there are sometimes parking complaints there, we haven't gotten any complaints about the outdoor seating area in terms of noise and things like that. So
That's front and side only, correct?
I would say that's side. I would consider that side.
it's
So-
on the corner, yeah.
Right,
so it's
right.
that.
Let's take what works and code off of what works, rather than trying to throw darts at things. And then I think that drives, so let me go back and look at those, and then bring propositions back to you.
So can we eliminate some of your options
Yeah,
to
yeah.
help?
Yep.
So it sounds like the no regulations is out,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Well, separate discussion.
Yeah.
And that goes along with the no outdoor service areas in on-street parking spaces is out,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we're gonna discuss that.
right? Can you explain to me why we would restrict to front and side only? I mean, that would eliminate Amici's.
Right, that would eliminate Amici's. So that would be an option to just make sure it's not next door to residential, because the majority of your commercial lots back up to residential. So it sounds like you don't want to do that, so we can take that off.
I mean, is everyone comfortable with taking that option off?
But kind of, I guess. Maybe. So we would allow these in the back, essentially in the parking lot, or these private easement. Like most of our buildings, I'm thinking, have the alley behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? So we would allow them in the alley? I mean, I think that would be kind of,
So no, we would not necessarily allow them in the alley, and that's where your buffer could come in. You could require that they maintain a drive aisle, for example, behind the building. The business on Dorothea, the corner, the former Sugar Kisses, that was supposed to be the Brew Distillery, which is no longer going to happen. But in that case, they did contemplate outdoor seating behind the building and had enough space to put it behind the building, still have a drive aisle, and that wouldn't have been an issue. So there are instances where you could fit not an Amici size outdoor seating area, but
Right.
something smaller and still maintain a drive aisle.
but one of the other goals is to also kind of liven our streetscape, correct? I mean, that would be, you see people sitting outside enjoying whatever it is they're enjoying, kind of liven the streetscape. So now we're pushing that whoops, I did the same thing. Pushed it behind our buildings now.
We're not necessarily requiring it, but like Amici's doesn't have room in the front or the side.
I think
And
we're
with our
using
build to
Amici's, but
line.
Amici's, in my mind, is an exception than
Isn't
Berkeley
Cocoa,
Common.
doesn't Cocoa Fairfields have the same thing?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
They
to me,
did. They-
Berkeley Common or 24 seconds, you walk out that back door, you're a sidewalk, a parking, like an easement.
But
There-
there are we have very limited space in the front. So I think if you're limiting it to the front and side, which I'm not saying, you shouldn't necessarily do, but you are going to severely limit the areas and businesses that can have outdoor seating or the number of tables that they can have.
So I think what we're saying is, what I'm hearing is front, side, and rear. All of those are game
sure.
for an outdoor
Yeah,
seating area.
just with the right rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Timing of outdoor service areas. So, right now, you have your ordinance on streets, sidewalks, and other public places prohibits outdoor cafe seating in the public right of way between November 1st and March 31st. That's your general ordinance. I've seen that in other places, and it's to make sure that snow removal happens. And these were probably also written pre-pandemic. Or some were also, and so then that's the reason for it. I've also seen it that in the public right-of-way, it's prohibited from that November 1st to March 31st or around then, so that, again, you can clear snow. You can have no regulations on timing. You could prohibit all outdoor service areas between November 1st and 31st, or you could just do it in the public right-of-way.
I'd be in favor of that third option.
Okay.
The public right-of-way option?
Yeah.
So I know
Someone can make money at Christmas, whatever.
So I know that the DDA has discussed, I'm sure it's not happening this year, but the DDA has discussed hiring a company to clear all the sidewalks in the downtown, so that everything's getting cleared and it becomes very walkable. In that instance, I think, yeah, like once you start adding in things on the sidewalk, you're gonna run into a problem and it's gonna make that cost money or people not wanna like clear it properly at that point. So, I think limiting it during snow times on the public, side right walk.
And we have ordinances about clearing snow, I'm sure.
For
We
commercial properties.
do, but that's a lot on the code. I mean, there are definitely places that don't shovel, and then it becomes that like weird crunchy break your ankle ice.
Okay, so it sounds like you're comfortable with prohibiting the outdoor service areas in the public right-of-way between November 1st and 31st, but if it's on private property, fine. Okay. Noise, that was one of your main concerns. Your current noise ordinance prohibits loud noises that would disturb any residences between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. If you do want an interesting read that whole noise ordinance.
From 1972.
I think there was like yodeling or something. But you could include regulations that prohibit amplified music or noise. I've seen those. Or you could just rely on that city's noise ordinance and anything between 11 and 7.
So the reality is anything that goes beyond the noise ordinance is still gonna require public safety to handle, just as if they were handling the noise ordinance anyways, correct?
Right, I mean, if we got a noise complaint during regular business hours, maybe we would send code enforcement, but it's mostly probably gonna be after regular business hours.
How does that affect home improvement projects, large projects?
Like construction noise? Well, I'd have to look at
Those
the
have, it has
ordinance.
to be done by 7.
But I don't think there's like a specific decibel level that,
No, there isn't.
yeah.
No, it just, I think it's just a blanket, like, construction
6 a.m.
stuff
to
must be
7.
done,
It's-
yeah.
I think it's a weird early time.
Is it, so that's completely separate than what we're referring to?
Oh,
there?
yeah,
Hmm.
completely separate.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is rely on the city's noise ordinance.
I think so.
Lisa, are you comfortable
I know,
with
Lisa,
that? or-
Lisa got something to say.
I mean, this was my concern, and it's back to the residential, and we're not gonna have control and be able to regulate on a case-by-case basis, and so, I guess I do still have some concern, but I don't know that prohibiting amplified music or noise is gonna do it. I don't know what the answer is, which is why I'm hesitating.
I mean, I'm thinking that that's maybe like the setbacks or buffering, it gets
think,
addressed in those sorts
You
of
know,
ways.
if you're buying a house behind something, no matter what the setback is, it's gonna impact that particular property. You're immediately gonna think, there's a bar right there. You won't even know these times or anything. You're just gonna think there's gonna be noise most likely.
What
but
if
what
you
if
bought
something
it
gets
10 years
built?
ago and this wasn't in effect, and now you're having to deal with the ordinance
I
being
mean, it was a
changed? to allow it?
hairdresser before or something.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's, things change, so, you know, that's also, if you're living that close to that, that's a reality that could happen. Which, no, people don't check what this is zoned for, so, you know, that could happen.
I mean, things that happen that are loud noises that tend to be distracting and really are amplified music, live music, PA announcements, things like that. So if you don't allow any amplified music or noise, then that takes a lot of that out. Otherwise, it's just conversation.
So, and that's where I'm concerned about the city's noise ordinance, really. How do you say they're violating the city's noise ordinance when they're running a business they're allowed to run and people are just talking? It's just,
Right.
I mean, I think that's a struggle for enforcement.
Yeah, I don't think we could regulate talking. It would have to be like the live music or something like that.
Boisterous activity, the police would come in and be like, guys, calm it down, or whatever. Do we get any complaints about 24/7? I mean, I'm trying to think of places
I mean,
where.
not that I know of, but I don't hear all the complaints that go to public safety. I'd have to check with public safety.
So then maybe the amplified music or noise, I mean, something about exterior speakers,
Or we could shut them off at 11 p.m. Or we could change that time to 10 p.m. because I'm thinking of somebody like 24 seconds if they want to watch a football game upstairs or a game, they can't have any sound on.
that's true.
Right,
Well,
that would
that-
be any sound.
Well, that would, no, there's just saying amplified music or noise. So I don't know that we would consider a TV.
Amplified noise.
But it isn't
I mean, if we got a complaint, it's hard to envision a time when you'd have
24
speakers on a
seconds doesn't go all the way through though either to the residential.
the back, yeah.
Right.
But isn't violation of the ordinance triggered by a decibel level?
Technically, yes. I don't know that public safety goes out there and measures it.
Okay.
I mean-
I was just gonna say, so like, what is considered loud noises?
I mean, I think, I don't know, in almost every city I've lived in, right? If someone calls and is complaining about a loud noise, the police officers show up and they go, hey, can you keep it down? They've been complaining, and settles everything down, and everyone goes on their merry way.
Then I don't see how amplified music or noise would be any different than not allowing for loud noises between 11 and 7. Unless that came with some kind of, tool to measure against. I think isn't most noise ordinances, or
50 decibels at
Is
the,
it 50? I thought it was 85.
a lot of places it's 50, and that's like a home of a refrigerator. Sometimes it's 85 or 100, depending on what they're next door to.
What if we add something about if there's going to be TVs or music playing or anything like that in the outside, that they have to have some buffering to kind of
Like a,
help?
like a distance buffer or?
Something that kind of,
Buffer, absorber.
right, or something.
I think what would be better is that if they have those, then at the property line, it has to measure X decibels. And it's up to them to figure out what it is.
And who's gonna go out and measure with decibels to violate someone?
We've always heard how hard it is to measure that,
Yeah,
to
haven't we
enforce
had
it.
huge conversations about decibels?
With if the wind's blowing, like, I mean, it's been like, you can't really track it almost, like,
So I do think, though, that Lisa makes a point in saying that if 24 Seconds had their TVs too loud and somebody complained and public safety went out there and said, hey, can you turn the TVs down? They probably would just turn the TVs down.
for sure.
I mean, you could always have the property owner that's going to say, well, no, I think I'm at 69 decibels and it says 70 and you're going to have to come out here and confirm. But that's going to be really, really like far between. I would think live music as opposed to televisions would really be the bigger concern.
Yeah.
What about entertainment at all?
What other entertainment?
That they would have to have, now I'm turning this into something bigger, forget it.
Thank you.
I can rely on the city's noise ordinance.
Okay. But maybe something we can do is in the regulations, cite that noise ordinance and cite the times. So, or that's in the application, so that it's really explicit to the people applying what the rules are. It'd be better if it's in the application, not cross-referenced in, because
We're going to do like a handout
yeah,
and a webpage, so
okay.
it would be there too.
It sounds like that might be another ordinance to add to our list.
What's that, noise?
Yeah. no
Oh,
more.
we will tackle that as part of the full rewrite, yeah.
All right. So another thing is enclosures and railings, and it's basically, do you want a lot of rules around them? Do you want them to be fancy wrought iron? That's what Northville and Dexter have been. They're very explicit. Other places just have guidelines. We could look at the design guidelines for the downtown and take some things off of those, or say that, or just that it is compatible. It's the same type of materials as the primary building.
I did kind of look at the DDA outdoor seating, and, I mean, it kind of barely mentions railings. It doesn't have a whole lot to draw from there. How does this affect, like, the idea of throwing out a couple cafe tables?
So you're only having enclosures and railings when it's either next to traffic, so like Green Lantern, because they're right next to where cars rotate or are moving. And then also if there's alcohol served. And as Kristen said, the Liquor Commission requires that it's in a certain area. So again, sometimes those are as simple as the things you see at convention centers where it's a post and a cloth ribbon that they tie, that is one to another. Or so you could leave it completely up to them. If you're concerned about certain aesthetics, then you need to either put guidelines or regulations in. My instinct is that you probably didn't want anything except that it's compatible with the building or the block.
I like the MLCC's requirements that it be well-defined and clearly marked. And I know the MLCC even allows planters as
Right.
long as you can't get through them. Does anybody have a preference?
I don't know. I think it could go either way. They could look really nice, or a 5-gallon bucket with a 2x4 and a piece of ribbon tied around it isn't really the look we're going to.
I mean, when you look at the Berkley Common, right, they've done a beautiful job in there, right? And because they don't want anybody turning in, right? When you look at those sides, I'm like, oh, the concrete blocks, those are, that is not attractive.
And that was not something common put in.
Absolutely, right? I know that was the city,
Specific,
but
yeah.
as as you're walking by, I'm like, that's not an ideal look, right? I wouldn't, so I think,
We
it
have to
should
have
meet
some
the aesthetic
sorta-
of the building.
Yeah.
But not necessarily the material of the building, because then that might have to be stone, correct?
Or it could be. So let's do this. What I'm hearing from you is more guidelines, and that might be 5 pictures and, recommended materials, prohibited materials.
Yeah, guidelines with flexibility.
Yeah, that's something general. That's
Design.
easy to do. We can bring that back along with it and it can ride with it. And that, you don't necessarily want to put that in the ordinance because it might change over time. And when it's in the ordinance, it's got to be recommended by you and approved by council, and it's a process. Does that sound good? Okay. Street furniture and lighting. Again, you could just let them bring what they wanted. We listed some things in our memo. All of those really have to deal with health and safety, that it's not gonna catch on fire, that it's not gonna get blown all over the place, that they're in good repair. And then, that you allow decorative lighting, but it's not gonna create glare or hazards. We would need to add a sentence in there about giving an exception from your current lighting ordinance. And also, my note to myself today was that we'd probably need to have a definition of what decorative outdoor lighting is, because that could be construed a bunch of different ways, but can do that. And again, some places they'll get down to the color of the umbrella.
I like what you have,
Okay,
personally. This is all still gonna go to administrative approval.
right.
It's not like free reign.
No. And I don't know if I don't know if you've ever met Kim Anderson, but she would not let one of these go by. Not that you should ever regulate based on personality, but.
So are we looking at the safety ones and then not dealing with like consistent with character or anything like that?
All of these are what she's recommending, all 4 bullets.
So I think the question is, do you want any of the options that are listed? And it sounds like you're saying, Lisa, no. Lisa H, no.
I like the recommendation, I like Megan's recommendation.
But we don't need to worry about any of the.
The option.
Personally, I don't think so. Because you're still gonna approve this stuff.
Yeah, but it makes the difference. And I like it at Clark's, between Clark's and the antique shop, because it is just like this kooky area, but it's kind of like a mishmash of different seating things.
It is a fine line between kooky and like junkyard.
Yeah.
Where is this?
Clark's the.
Oh, the
sidewalk.
ice cream place.
Yeah.
I get it. It's like you can't
Um,
place your finger on it, but it is right there between those 2 definitions.
And it does say, though, that all outdoor service area furniture would need to be kept in good repair, not have broken, peeling, or rusting features. So we would have that.
Right, but you would also have somebody who can do that, have a picnic table and a French cafe looking seat and, a wicker couch and all of those things. And if that's okay, then that's okay. Like, for some reason it works there. I don't know that I'd want to see that everywhere.
Have to be
though,
uniform.
so.
Well, and I think one of the keys with that is that it's well maintained. Because where that line from quaint and inviting and interesting to that looks like my Aunt Stella's yard is about maintenance. Okay.
All right, so we're good with all the safety stuff.
Yeah. So for regulations if alcohol is served, we can They say it's in a clearly marked area. Some places have location, size of area, hours of operation. And at a minimum, we're just saying that they need to submit a copy of their liquor license for the outdoor seating area. But there doesn't seem to be a tradition here that I've seen in other communities of really constraining where alcohol is served. And that's typically where I've seen additional regulations just beyond what the state required. But I wanted to ask.
What do you mean constraining?
I have a lot of communities where every single time alcohol is either served or sold, it's a special land use.
Right, traditionally, we have not had that approach as a city.
So if they're serving alcohol, should it be treated any differently as an outdoor service area?
They are regulated by the Michigan Alcohol
Yeah.
Control Board. I mean, and have their own guidelines, right? Or requirements, I guess.
They're pretty basic, but yeah. Okay. For the outdoor seating area, there's some things that you can do. Maintain the current regulations, which is an unobstructed side by dimension of 5 feet. That's typical if shoulder to shoulder passing of 2 people. If somebody's in a wheelchair, usually the 2 wheelchairs probably won't fit, but a normally abled person would have to scooch off to the side. Usually, if it's a busy public area, 10 feet's what's recommended from an urban design guideline, and also if you look at certain standards. And then we would also want to include a 5-foot access to the door of the associated building. And actually, that should be a barrier-free, so that if somebody needs to get there, there should be ramps and things like that. Because sometimes if you're in a parking lot, even if it's the on-site parking lot, there might be a curb and they're gonna need a ramp. But it's really, do you want to have 5 or 10 feet for that required sidewalk? That once they put things in the sidewalk, how much area do you want left over for people to pass?
Some of our, what's our normal sidewalks on 12 Mile? Are they even,
I don't know that you'd be able to fit a lot to
like
outdoor
if we
seating
limit it to
areas,
10 feet, we're going to get nothing.
potentially.
We're going to get a chair, but no table. Half a
I
chair.
mean, conversely, have you walked like down Royal Oak? There are times that like when people are walking this way and I'm walking this way and there are people dining, I'm like, I feel like
In
I'm
their table.
looming over their table right there, and like I don't even know how they feel because I feel super uncomfortable. I'm like, sorry, I can't get through.
But it is okay because, I mean, you still walked that way, right?
I mean, you know,
There's really no other option.
Right.
Walk in the street.
you know.
Cross and go a different way.
I'd be okay with 5 feet.
Yeah, 5
I mean, is that kind of, that's the standard?
that's the minimum.
That's the standard for a sidewalk. And again, it's a standard where 2 people can pass each other comfortably.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, gotta leave something available.
Okay. And include the 5-foot access to the door of the associated building. All right, we are almost done here.
A lot of things.
I know. I'm so sorry. But there was so much. So you're allowing on-site parking spaces to be converted. Some ordinances only allow 2 or 3 per site. Others say, as long as you meet your minimum zoning requirements, we don't care how many you take over. So what I've sensed from the group so far is that it would be really the second one, that as long as you meet your minimum parking requirements, you're fine. You can take as many spaces as you want.
Yeah.
How does that work with shared parking then? They would, if we have an agreement, does that get very difficult?
It doesn't get very, if
managed?
you're sharing spaces with another business, you cannot use those spaces for outdoor seating. They'd have to be available for the other business to use as
Right,
parking.
but could you use your own then and say,
So if you have spaces, say you have an office building that requires 8 spaces, they're sharing their 10 space total parking lot with the adjacent business because they have different operating hours. If they were sharing all 10 of those spaces, then no, they could not occupy 2 of them within an outdoor seating area, which an office was not a good example. A restaurant.
right? But an office, if let's say they wanted to, they could go outside to have a outdoor lunchroom.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
It doesn't have to be just a restaurant that we're allowing this for.
Well, for this when we're talking about outdoor seating, we're talking about accessory to a restaurant. If an office wanted to take 2 of their parking spaces and convert it to an outdoor plaza for their paid or for their employees, fine. But I guess the short answer would be, if you had a parking lot where you were only sharing a portion of the spaces and you had excess parking, then you could turn those excess parking spaces into an outdoor seating area. But you could not turn any portion of the spaces that are shared into an outdoor seating area. Does that make sense?
And neither business could then.
Right. If if those spaces are shared, whatever portion of those that are shared, they have to remain as shared parking spaces.
I mean, yep.
Okay. So they can have as many as they want, just as long as they meet those minimums. Okay. Rooftop seating, we've gone over. Temporary shelters, that was really, do you allow them? Maybe you allow them only between November 1st and March 31st, so when it's cold. Or do you not allow them at all? Obviously, if we allowed them, we would put in some restrictions where they're not gonna catch on fire. There are some spacing requirements that you can put in.
Well, we have allowed them, right? I mean, Berkeley Common had them,
The igloos.
Republica had them, didn't they?
So they're not addressed right now in the ordinance. So they were allowed kind of as part of that resolution. But yes, they have been here.
Yeah, I don't know why we wouldn't want to keep them.
Yeah, just throw some rules and aesthetics behind it.
Year-round or only during the cold months?
Year-round.
Year round is fine.
All right. And then the rest of the memo really these are things that we thought,
Why would we want them year-round? Why would we want them in the summer?
Igloos.
I mean, I don't think it necessarily has to be an igloo. It's just a temporary shelter. So it could be something that prevents rain, right? But that's,
Could be an igloo with an
Removable
air
and not-
conditioner. Like an igloo-like
Could be
structure.
fun.
I'm thinking like
Okay.
Instead of a heater, throw an air
I guess I
conditioner?
don't care. I just was surprised when you all were all of you said year-round. I was like, oh.
I
So-
didn't say anything.
It's allowed, but not required.
The cabanas would be an example. That would be
Okay.
a summer application.
Okay.
and really everything else in here are things where we felt like these were things for health, safety, and welfare that were must kind of your belt and suspenders. So I don't think we need to go over all of them unless anybody had a question or something that they flagged.
looks like everyone's good.
Okay, so we'll take those back, and then it's 8:43, and we are just moving on to vape shops, but I would totally understand if people were exhausted and felt like that should go on to another time.
Is anybody opposed to moving on and dealing with vape shops?
I'm not opposed.
I'm not.
I'll just stop talking. Although I should say, I do have a lot of scribble on this one.
Okay, so we had the proposed intent, and then would welcome scribbles or suggestions on making that stronger.
The only notes I have for the intent is we define it as tobacco and vape shops, but we don't define it like that throughout the ordinance. we still have it as vape shops and tobacco stores.
Okay,
Oh, so just like a terminology, okay.
okay. Thank you.
I noticed that throughout the ordinance, so,
Okay. We'll pick one and stick to it.
that's right.
All right, so, and just, the reason to have those is to make it clear why we're doing that, and then, while this may not be plopped into the zoning ordinance when things are all adopted, if somebody ever questioned why this was done, especially on a legal basis, you have that intent there. Okay, so definitions, again, that name will be consistent. We took out the very simple one of any establishment having more than 30% of shelf space devoted to selling tobacco, cigarettes, or smoking paraphernalia. Had a much longer definition. Also, it says any grocery store, supermarket, convenience store, similar retail use not only sells conventional cigars, cigarettes, vapor products, or tobacco as an ancillary sale shall not be defined as tobacco store or and vape shop. And those subsequent things are the definitions of things that were mentioned in the definition, so that's clear. Lisa.
I would ask at the end of the first paragraph that you put for purposes of this section or article or whatever,
Okay.
before you go into the definitions. Also, I would ask that if you can make the definition of nicotine product consistent with section 82-385 of our code of ordinances. There's already a definition for nicotine product. I don't know if it's outdated,
Okay,
but if it's not, we should have a consistent definition.
section 82-85.
82-385, it's about minors and tobacco and vape products.
Okay, great.
And then also question about hookah shops, how they fall into this.
So a hookah shop or a smoking lounge, those are usually places where people buy the product and consume the product there on site, like a bar. This would not be that. This is just selling, it's not consumption on site.
So sales of the hookah stuff isn't applicable then?
Yeah, hookah's a pipe, so,
But isn't it a nicotine product? Or
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't
Nicotine in it.
there's nicotine in it?
yeah. So we could add that.
Well,
Or-
I do think that I would ask you to look at the CDC's website because they have, I'm looking at it's an article about e-cigarette or vaping, and it has all kinds of helpful information that I kind of fumbled through when I was comparing it to the definitions.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Also, the way we define vapor product, it requires it to contain nicotine, but from what I understand, they don't necessarily, the product doesn't necessarily contain nicotine when people vape.
Okay, that's true. Some of it. It doesn't necessarily, yeah.
And,
Okay.
and the way we define it, it has to in order to fit the definition.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I also found on the CDC website, there's like, when you talk about the product, there's like vape pens and vaporizers and hookah pens, apparently. There's something called e-liquid, which is what they vape. I don't do it, I don't know anything about it, but I just kind of was reading it thinking that maybe we need to
Yeah.
compare what they have and
Okay.
spice this up a little.
They're
Sure.
good old-fashioned cigarettes. Where did we go so astray?
All right. Anybody else anything on the definition? All right. Now we'll get into the meat of it. Where you would allow these. So we talked about local business, Greenfield, Gateway, 12 Mile, and Woodward District. And again, always keep in mind if you put in local business, then it automatically goes into Woodward because those two telescope each other. And then if you look on page 3 of our memo, you'll see I highlighted in blue all of those areas, then that would be the approximate location. And my real question to you is, when I looked at this, I thought, wow, that's a lot of area on Greenfield. And also, I didn't know whether you were aware that Greenfield is not always only Greenfield. Sometimes it's Elwood, and then it's both sides of Elwood. Sometimes it's one side, sometimes it's both sides of Elwood, that zoning district, the way it's drawn right now. And I didn't know whether you were comfortable with this being an allowed use.
Can we just have it the same as where the marijuana shops were?
Yeah,
Wasn't that discussed last time? We kind of tossed that around, right?
you would toss that
Because then we
around.
have the schools into account. I mean, if we're going to allow a marijuana shop,
Yeah.
it seems like we should allow a
And then-
nicotine shop.
Greenfield got into the mix, and then, so we added it, that was in the list that I had for my notes.
I mean, to me, it's retail, retail's retail, so wherever retail's allowed,
So that would be Greenfield then.
it would include it to me, in my opinion.
And Elwood then.
I mean, so my problem with Greenfield is like, I don't know. It's just been the thing that we just kind of keep throwing everything at. We let everything happen at Greenfield, but I mean, nobody wants to live right next to somebody who's like, I'm opening my my vape shop right next to your house. And if we allow it on Greenfield and they're on one of those Elwood streets, they could.
I mean, you could say the district with, except on Elwood Street.
You could.
And why not Coolidge? Just because the school?
Yeah. I mean, the Coolidge district goes, that goes right by the high school, and that was one of the reasons not to have it, so, and also, I think it allowed it, the marijuana is allowed on 11 Mile.
It is. Several of our marijuana businesses will be on 11 Mile.
How many?
I
Just right?
two.
Oh, 3.
No, 2 or 3.
Yeah, okay. I think you said 7. And I was
No,
like,
I said
missed last.
several. Several.
I was like, I
Not
missed last
7.
meeting, and I don't know.
No.
Didn't see that when I watched
Several.
it. I was like, okay, thank you
They
for
multiplied.
clarifying. I was like, how many?
Do we want to say Greenfield only on Greenfield? Local business gateway 12 Mile Woodward?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm comfortable
I
with
wouldn't
that.
want it on Elwood.
Okay.
So no Greenfield.
Well, no, well, in the Greenfield district, but only on Greenfield.
Okay.
No Elwood.
Yeah, okay.
And then no 11 Mile?
That's what we hadn't discussed before. 11 Mile is really more of an office district, more than anything.
But we have a
And then it allows residential.
we have an alcohol store there, correct?
Mm-hmm.
At least
no,
one,
That's something else. So,
2 or 3.
Right, you do allow retail stores,
And marijuana stores.
and marijuana stores. Yeah.
So I mean,
so we could put 11 Mile in.
I think 11 Mile
Okay.
is reasonable personally.
there's no school there, correct? We determined that before.
Okay.
Marijuana. There's no schools, or even in Oak Park or
Not,
Huntington
they,
Woods.
I think it's 500 feet, right? So no.
Yeah.
Is it considered a NIMBY or a less desirable use of land, vape shops? I mean, I'm assuming it's kind of at the lower end of what's desirable or undesirable. I'm just thinking of like what Oak Park is trying to accomplish with 11 Mile and kind of being the good neighbor.
And if you're talking generally, yes, that's probably the case. I mean, not that I want to keep throwing this out here, but we are going to be looking at all of these uses. And 11 Mile could very well change in character. I mean, it's a little bit of a hodgepodge right now.
And I mean, and we did talk in the master plan about having some kind of guidelines for 11 Mile.
Yes, that's probably further off than a zoning ordinance rewrite, but it would be wonderful to have some design guidelines for 11 Mile and to match what Oak Park is trying to accomplish on their side and to coordinate with them so we end up with one cohesive streetscape and uses and all of that is definitely the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I mean, if that's a bridge that's coming down the road, that's fine.
It's a little far down the road.
In The other thing here was that where do you put that buffer requirement? And the buffer that you had talked about was 1,000 square feet, 1,000 feet from each other, and not from any other uses.
Yeah, so I guess I had a question about pre-existing. I mean, isn't it just 1,000 feet from another vape shop? Smoker vape shop?
Well, at the time of application, so.
What if they applied at the same time?
The day the ordinance went into effect.
I don't know, I just
I mean,
seemed-
right, what if you had somebody who wanted to build two of them and submitted both applications? Yeah,
I
I
think
guess
just
pre-existing
another
isn't
would be
needed.
easier,
Yeah.
simpler.
So what was the answer? Just
To just change it to, instead of 1,000 feet of a pre-existing
Oh,
vape shop
oh,
or tobacco
another.
store, just
Another
1,000 feet from another.
vape shop or
okay.
tobacco store. Okay, yep, that's fine. And we're proposing to put it in the schedule of regulations. It's fairly unusual, but that's where your marijuana buffer is. The only other choice is to like copy and paste it and put it in every article, which only sets you up for headaches if something is amended ever again, because then you have to amend it in 5 places instead of 1.
I would also like to know, are we creating non-conforming uses by this ordinance? And obviously, we all know a non-conforming use, you've got a business, you think you're good to go, and then all of a sudden, you can't expand your business, and if you shut down for a certain period of time, you could lose it. I mean, I think those are things we ought to consider as well.
I think the only current
Would be allowed.
tobacco shop that we have, or vape shop, right, is on the corner of 12 and Coolidge.
Yeah, we miss.
No, there's a few, there's some on Woodward.
There's a tobacco shop on Woodward.
There's also a space on near the school on Coolidge that hasn't opened. The Smokers Island. It's been under renovation for a long time now. I'd have to see if their business license was approved and how long that approval would last for.
Yeah, I thought it looked emptier.
It is empty,
Yeah.
but it has the sign up. It could be approved. I'd have to check. That's the one that comes to mind that could be problematic.
Right.
That's the one that kind of sparked
That
this
started
discussion,
Yeah.
correct? I mean,
I think so, yeah. So I could
I
check
feel
on
like that's
that
been there and empty for at least a year.
a while, yeah.
maybe I missed it. I'm sure you talked about it, but we're not regulating the amount.
No,
So when you go into some of these, tobacco might not be their number one seller. So it might not actually, or nicotine product, any of these products listed, might not be their number one seller. Some of them are considered like a glass shop where they're selling more paraphernalia to ingest nicotine and other substances, correct? So we're writing this or recommending this ordinance, but it might, in the end, a shop could still sneak through that to get, like, for example, the one over here, Mr. Bill's, like, they have a whole section of nothing but glass. If you look in there, they might be having more artwork than nicotine, if that makes sense.
Theoretically, yes, and we could always revisit the ordinance. I think that the intent is more of a perception than it is to try to limit access, right? Because the gas station could still sell some of these products as long as it's not their principal use. So,
and the definition says an ancillary sale, and so an ancillary sale is actually less than like an accessory. It's just that this is something that we sell kind of on the side. It's like the candy at it in the checkout line.
Right, but I mean,
but yes, you could
a store
have,
like the one we have already may actually be a store that sells more glassware
yes.
and paperwork or paper.
you could have a pipe shop that's selling those types of products and has a small display of nicotine products or vaping products, but their main thing that they're selling is, for lack of a better word, equipment, not product.
Right. So
And
that's where I mean
that would be permitted.
correct. So we're writing this ordinance or making this recommendation. I'm just clarifying that because the ask was to make sure that this isn't in our school district, so like,
scratch that for a second, Greg. It does reference tobacco
I was just gonna
paraphernalia
ask that, yeah.
in the definitions, so I misspoke.
which
I mean,
one,
I
I'm
feel like that's
sorry.
great. I also feel like, I
Oh,
mean, there was a
tobacco product.
while, I think when marijuana was illegal, that there were a lot of those kinds of shops, right? We're a glass shop and we're selling tobacco smoking products, but everybody else knew that it was not for that purpose. I think with the legalization, marijuana, a lot of those businesses sell that kind of stuff too, and it's legal to go in there and it's legal to get it there. So I don't think we have so many of those, like, you know, here we are selling our glass.
I just still may be allowed next to a school as a different retail name,
Not if the. I mean,
right? I mean, the whole ask was
if you're saying
because
I'm a glass store, but all you're selling are.
I'm a
glass,
marijuana
like,
dispenser, not a
smoking
dispensary, but I'm a marijuana, a pipe store.
Then I guess, yeah,
Then that
you
would be
could-
tobacco
It would be
paraphernalia, right?
tobacco, but if they were to come in and say, well, these are just glass sculptures or something, I mean, we could get in the back and forth.
No,
with
no, no.
people.
I'm talking about like the glass pipes.
No, that would be tobacco paraphernalia.
Okay.
All right, any other thoughts, concerns, questions for the planning commission? Do you feel like you have a grasp of?
Yep.
And then are you just bringing us back?
Yep,
Or-
I'll bring you back things for outdoor seating regulations and vape shops.
All right then, moving on to new business. The Southfield Master Plan response.
This is just an FYI. Southfield recently updated their master plan. In accordance with the Michigan Planning, Zoning, and Enabling Act, we, an adjacent community, are given the opportunity to comment. There's not really anything of note. Greenfield is kind of continuing as Greenfield has on the Southfield side of the border. But if there's any comments that the Planning Commission would like me to pass along, please let me know and I will get them over to Southfield.
Perfect. And then our discussion on live work on 11 Mile.
So, we have a property owner on 11 Mile, the corner of 11 Mile and Cummings. It is, for lack of a better description, the siding building that Commissioner Marty Smith used to refer to all the time. So that particular property was originally a live workspace. It was a convenience store, and the gentleman who owned the convenience store lived in the back of the building. That was a non-conforming use that's not permitted in 11 Mile, and that use has since been abandoned. The building is still set up as a live workspace. The property owner, the current property owner, did explore a use variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals and was denied. So he wondered if the Planning Commission would have any appetite to including live work as a permitted or special land use in the 11 Mile district. I just met with him like 2 days ago, so I don't have a memo or anything prepared, but I told him I would at least pose the question to you all, and if there was absolutely no interest, we would not explore it further. If there might be some interest, then we could look at some different options, or we could just look at adding it as a principal or special land use. So I am just throwing out there to the commission if that's something that they would be interested in exploring. The master plan doesn't really talk about live work units as an option in the 11 Mile district. In my opinion, I think there might be instances where that could fit, particularly as we look at zoning ordinance updates and maybe look at things like maker spaces or something like that that might work on 11 Mile. So I'm just asking if give me a yes or no, you want to explore it further, or we have absolutely no interest and we should just drop it. Because I don't want to waste my staff time. I don't want to waste your time if there's just no interest.
Can't we look at it when we redo our 11 Mile plan and a couple bridges down the road?
Oh, yeah, we could
I mean,
definitely.
maybe that would be a more appropriate time.
Yeah, we could definitely put it off there. Before the applicant or potential applicant moved forward with proposing a text amendment and paying all the fees associated with it, I told them I would throw the question out to the Planning Commission to get your initial thoughts.
So you want like a yes or no vote?
So is it
I don't want to vote, no.
Is it a one-story building that he's in?
It's a one-story building.
Do we allow living on a, like
You don't know, we don't allow any residential.
No
on 11 mile.
residential.
Right, and some of our other districts allow the first floor retail use with
Right.
the living above. That's not even allowed.
Did he purchase?
Yes.
Do you know what the business is gonna be?
I know it's also very limited in terms of parking. So it could be an office, like an insurance office or something like that. It could be an artist space, or it could be a florist. That's what he has the parking for.
And it's tiny. The building
very
itself
small.
is very small
It's
too,
ve-
right?
The particular building is very small. I
Inside
was
it's
just in
still-
it the other day. The portion that's set up for the working space is smaller than this room. The living space is a little bit bigger. And I don't necessarily want to craft ordinance amendments for one particular property. So if we were to do something like this, it would probably, we would look at live work as a use for the entire 11-mile district.
So I'm not opposed to it, but honestly, I don't know enough about it I would want to learn a little bit more about how it's compatible with the area, how it works in other communities. So I'm not necessarily opposed to exploring it.
And that's the answer I'm looking for from the commission. Do you want to explore this further, or do you just want to say, we have absolutely no interest?
I think a more appropriate time is when we look at what's allowed in all of our districts, down a little bit further than immediate.
So as part of the zoning ordinance update.
Is that allowed to see how Oak Park develops, it allow what they're allowing?
I'd be interested in seeing information too on how it's abused.
So you would want to maybe explore it further
Like where does it
from
go?
the opposite angle.
Yeah, where does it go south?
Well, it sounds like at least the three of us who've spoken, we're all interested in learning more. It's a matter of timing that we're not on the same page.
Not high priority for me, but I'm
Okay.
interested in knowing more.
I mean, I guess that's where I am too. Like, I'd want to really, you'd think I like lived that master plan for a few years, but I'd want to relook at the like 11-mile portion of the master plan and kind of envision how it would fit in with what our plans were for that.
So I'm kind of hearing that this would fit better, the type of exploration that you guys are talking about probably fits better with a look at all of the uses in 11-mile, not this one particular use.
Yes, me personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So this would essentially deny this guy's business.
The ZBA already denied it.
The ZBA denied a use variance for a live.
They did deny that. And he's,
Were you there? Do you know the basis? Like,
Yeah, Megan and I were both there.
The applicant did not show up.
what?
What?
Well, he had a representative there,
Yes,
but who did not necessarily have all the details
correct.
associated with the proposal.
Oh, well, now it's a really low priority for me.
And
I mean,
I'm not trying to do something for one particular property.
I was just gonna say, I hate the idea of like, well, I need this, so we should now suddenly all try and like think about whether we should zone for this.
It's not a bad use for 11-mile. I think it's worth your time and consideration. His property is unique, but because it's so small and the building takes up quite a large amount of space on the property. However, there are other buildings and parcels in 11-mile where a live-work unit might work. I think the reason in the master plan that wasn't put in as a use was that 11-mile district also allows a lot of industrial uses that would not be appropriate for somebody to live above or adjacent in the same building with. So
And as we get into exploring the 11-mile uses, we do allow a lot of industrial uses, but a lot of those uses, given the size of the parcels, are not going to happen. They're just not feasible. So that whole corridor really needs to be re-examined and what works there. And I do kind of myself envision it a little bit as a maker space, as small scale production, but not the type of heavy machinery production that you might see in some larger communities. And those sorts of uses could be compatible with a live work space.
But this would also, like you said, when we look at all of them, has there been any other request? Just one property, correct?
There's this one request,
Right.
but if I'm playing devil's advocate, what I guess I'm saying is, yes, I agree with Megan that live work generally is not compatible with some of the more heavy industrial uses that are currently listed in the ordinance, but those heavy industrial uses are really
No.
just very unlikely to occur.
No, I hear you, but I mean, when we talk about all of the permitted uses in 11 Mile might be a more appropriate time to have the discussion of thinking about what our future of 11 Mile would be.
So that's
And
what
that's
I'm
gonna happen in
asking
a
you
little
guys.
while.
Is that that's going to be the next year's discussion? Is that the more appropriate time to talk about it? Or would you want to think about pursuing and looking at this live work option now, because a lot of the incompatible uses that are currently allowed are probably not going to happen?
Personally, I would say wait till we redo the whole district
Okay.
as one and just put it all out
I
as
mean,
one.
and I could make the same argument for, things on Coolidge and multifamily residential, I think all of our major roads, we really need to examine the zoning and like holistically, all of the zoning, right? Not just.
Sure.
I don't want to keep patching things, right? It feels like our whole zoning ordinance is full of like 8,000 patches, instead of like a comprehensive idea.
Okay.
Did that answer? Or?
Yeah, no, that answers.
Liaison reports. Anybody?
I wasn't at the last DDA meeting. I can't.
Neither was I. I went to the city council, that's the final one, right? The final marijuana business has been approved and is moving forward. That's about all that's fun and exciting from city council. I will mention, though, that this Saturday is trick-or-treating in our downtown and the Monster Mash. So trick-or-treating will go from 12 to 3 along 12 Mile and Coolidge. And then Coolidge will be shut down from Catalpa to 12 Mile, and we're going to have an epic party. We will have an aerial gymnast, stilt walkers, jugglers, unicyclists. There is a number of crafts and activities for kids to do. It's going to be a DJ. It's going to be super fun. So you all of you watching at home should show up. All right. Any additional comments from the commission?
Nope.
Staff?
A couple things. I don't know if I mentioned at the last meeting, but the downtown master plan was adopted by council in early October, so that is official. And the parking study that we are doing for the downtown area and to look at all of our parking standards was also approved by the DDA and by council. Fishbeck is going to be doing that parking study for us, and we're going to kick it off next month. I may be asking some of you to be part of a steering committee. We'll see. I haven't come up with that list yet, but stay tuned. And that will come up with parking recommendations. It will not come to this board for any ordinance amendments at this time. We're just laying the groundwork for the section of the zoning ordinance that deals with parking as for our larger zoning ordinance update.
So it's kind of like data.
It's data, but it is going to make recommendations for what our parking maximum or minimums should be.
Okay.
And then we can explore that further when we look at actual amendments, but it will at least have some data that those recommendations are based off of and a place to start our discussion.
Cool. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion, meeting adjourned.
I don't know how I got stuff.
I don't know, but you just started doing it now. I just look at you. Like, now it's your thing.
Yeah.